High above the jagged mountains where the clouds moved like silent rivers, the Dragon Queen lay upon a throne of shattered stone and scorched earth. Her wings stretched across the ruined valley like dark storms frozen in time, and her scales shimmered with the deep crimson of ancient fire. For centuries she had ruled the skies, feared by every creature that lived beneath the clouds. Armies fled at the shadow of her wings. Kingdoms burned if they dared threaten her kind. Yet now the valley was quiet, empty, and heavy with grief. The Dragon Queen lowered her massive head toward the cracked nests carved into the mountain rock. Once, those nests had held her young, 6 bright eggs, each glowing with life and promise. But they were gone, taken, stolen in the night by creatures too small and fragile to challenge her in open battle, yet clever enough to strike when she was far from the nest. Humans. For weeks she had searched the skies without rest. She had followed the scent of iron and smoke across forests and rivers, across distant cities and silent plains. Her fury had turned entire battalions to ash. Yet she had found no sign of the eggs. Only fear, lies, and ruins left behind by fleeing humans. Eventually even her rage had begun to fade, replaced by something colder. An endless emptiness that settled deep inside her chest. Dragons were creatures of immense power, but even they could not escape sorrow. With a long, trembling breath, the Dragon Queen closed her glowing eyes. The wind whispered through the mountain peaks, carrying snow and silence. Far below the cliffs, a small figure was climbing the narrow path that twisted toward the valley. The boy could not have been more than 10 years old. His coat was too thin for the freezing wind, and his boots were worn nearly through at the soles. Yet he climbed carefully, gripping the rocky ledges with determined hands. His name was Elias, and unlike the soldiers who had come before him with swords and torches, he carried nothing but a small wooden box strapped to his back. Every villager in the region had warned him not to come here. They spoke of the Dragon Queen in frightened whispers, how she had burned entire armies, how her roar could shatter castle walls, how the mountains themselves trembled beneath her wings. But Elias had heard another story too, a quieter one, told by his dying grandfather beside a fading fire. His grandfather had once been a scholar who studied dragons long before war and fear had poisoned the world between their species. According to him, dragons were not monsters. They were guardians of ancient balance, protectors of the skies and mountains. And the Dragon Queen had once been the wisest of them all, until someone stole her children. The boy reached the top of the final ridge and froze. The valley ahead looked like the aftermath of a storm made of fire. Blackened stones stretched across the ground, and enormous claw marks scarred the mountainside. At the center of it all lay the Dragon Queen herself. Even resting, she was vast beyond belief. Her wings folded across the valley floor like crimson cliffs, and faint smoke curled from her nostrils with each slow breath. Elias's heart pounded so loudly, he was sure she would hear it. For a moment fear nearly sent him running back down the mountain. But then he remembered the box on his back. Slowly, carefully, he stepped forward. A pebble shifted beneath his boot. The sound echoed across the silent valley. The Dragon Queen's golden eyes opened. They blazed like twin suns in the shadowed mountains. Her head lifted slowly, turning toward the tiny human standing alone in the valley. For a long moment neither of them moved. The Dragon Queen studied him with ancient intelligence, confusion flickering behind the anger in her gaze. Humans never came alone. They came with weapons, with fire, with greed. Yet this one was small and unarmed. When she spoke, her voice rolled across the valley like distant thunder. "Another thief has come to mock my grief?" The force of her voice nearly knocked Elias off his feet. Still, he swallowed his fear and stepped forward again. His hands trembled as he removed the wooden box from his back and placed it carefully on the blackened stone ground. "I didn't steal them," he said, his voice barely louder than the wind. The Dragon Queen's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you here, little human?" Elias slowly opened the lid of the box. A faint golden glow spilled into the dark valley. Inside the box lay one unbroken dragon egg. For a moment, the entire valley seemed to hold its breath. The golden glow from the egg spilled across the blackened stones, reflecting in the Dragon Queen's enormous eyes. She stared at the small wooden box as if she couldn't trust what she was seeing. The scent reached her a second later, the unmistakable warmth of dragon life. Her hatchling. The queen's massive body trembled slightly as she leaned closer. Each movement shook the ground, sending small avalanches of dust down the mountain slopes. Elias instinctively stepped back, but he didn't run. His heart pounded wildly as the Dragon Queen's colossal head lowered until her glowing eyes were level with him. "You dare bring false hope to my nest?" she growled, her voice rumbling like distant thunder. "It's not false," Elias said quickly, forcing the words out through his fear. "I found it." The queen's gaze flicked back to the egg. The shell shimmered faintly gold, warm and alive. A soft tapping sound echoed from inside. Tap tap. The Dragon Queen froze. That sound had once been the most precious music in her world. Very slowly, with a gentleness no human army had ever witnessed, she lowered her enormous claw beside the box. Her talons, each longer than Elias's entire arm, rested carefully on the ground so they wouldn't crush the fragile egg. "Where?" she demanded quietly. Elias swallowed. "In a fortress, far from here," he said. "The soldiers who took them were hiding the eggs underground." At the word soldiers, a deep growl rolled through the queen's chest. Flames flickered faintly between her teeth. "I searched their cities," she snarled. "I burned their armies. Yet I found nothing." "They moved them," Elias said. "My grandfather helped build the fortress. Before he died, he told me where it was." The Dragon Queen's eyes locked onto the boy again. "And why?" she asked slowly. "Would a human child bring my young back to me?" Elias hesitated. Then he answered honestly, "Because it's wrong." The simple words seemed to confuse the ancient dragon more than any lie could have. Humans had hunted dragons for centuries. They had stolen scales, bones, and eggs to sell for gold or power. Rarely had one done anything for a dragon without expecting something in return. Yet this boy stood alone in a ruined valley, offering back what his kind had stolen. Another tap echoed from the egg. The shell cracked slightly. The Dragon Queen inhaled sharply. Her massive head lowered even closer to the box as the crack widened slowly across the glowing surface. Elias took another cautious step back as a tiny claw pushed through the shell. The hatchling chirped softly. It was the smallest sound in the world, yet it shattered the silence of the valley like thunder. The baby dragon pushed its way free, blinking tiny golden eyes at the cold mountain air. Its scales shimmered pale red like fresh embers, and its wings were still folded clumsily against its body. For a moment the hatchling simply stared. Then it looked up, right at the Dragon Queen. The tiny creature squeaked happily. "MRRP." The queen's breath caught. Carefully, so carefully it was almost unbelievable. She nudged the hatchling with the tip of her snout. The baby dragon chirped again and climbed onto her nose without hesitation. Elias couldn't stop staring. The Dragon Queen, the creature entire kingdoms feared, closed her eyes as the tiny hatchling nuzzled against her scales. A low, trembling rumble echoed through her chest. It wasn't a roar. It was closer to a sob. "My child," she whispered. For several long moments, the valley held only the quiet sounds of the hatchling chirping and the wind moving through the mountains. Then the queen slowly turned her gaze back toward Elias. Her expression had changed. The burning rage in her eyes had softened into something deeper. "You returned what my enemies stole," she said quietly. Elias nodded. "I wish I could bring the others too," he said. "But I think they're still in the fortress." The Dragon Queen's wings unfolded slowly, casting a shadow across the valley like an approaching storm. The hatchling clung happily to the scales on her snout. The queen looked toward the distant horizon. Smoke curled from between her teeth. "Then we will retrieve them." Elias blinked nervously. "We?" The Dragon Queen lowered her head again until one enormous golden eye stared directly at him. "You know where they are." Elias suddenly realized what he had started. The most powerful dragon in the world was about to attack a human fortress. And somehow, the wind grew stronger as the dragon queen spread her enormous wings. Snow and ash swirled through the ruined valley while the newborn hatchling clung happily to the scales on her snout, chirping as if this was the most exciting moment of its young life. Elias stood frozen beside the empty wooden box, staring up at the creature that towered above him like a living mountain. Only moments ago she had looked ready to destroy anything that moved. Now her gaze held something different. Purpose. "You know the fortress?" the Dragon Queen said, her voice rumbling across the cliffs. "Show me." Elias swallowed nervously. "It's far across the western mountains. The soldiers built it inside an old iron mine. My grandfather helped design the tunnels before he realized what they planned to do with the eggs." The queen's eyes burned with quiet fury. Humans who steal dragon young deserve the fire they bring upon themselves. The baby dragon squeaked again and climbed down her snout, crawling along her massive horn before settling near the base of her head like a tiny rider. Elias stared. "I don't think he's planning to let go," the boy said carefully. The Dragon Queen huffed softly, sending a warm gust of air across the valley. "He is newly hatched. The world is exciting to him." She lowered one massive claw to the ground beside Elias. The talons were longer than swords, yet she placed them gently enough that the stone beneath barely cracked. "Climb," she said. Elias blinked. "You want me to ride you?" "You know the way," the queen replied, "and the fortress will not surrender its prisoners easily." The boy looked down the mountain path he had spent hours climbing. Then he looked back at the Dragon Queen. Riding a dragon into battle against a fortress full of soldiers had definitely not been part of his plan when he left home. But the thought of those stolen dragon eggs, hidden in darkness, made his chest tighten. He nodded slowly. "Okay." Carefully, Elias climbed onto the Dragon Queen's massive claw. She lifted him effortlessly, placing him between the armored ridges along her neck. The scales there were surprisingly warm, like sun-heated stone. The hatchling chirped happily and waddled toward him. Apparently Elias was its favorite new climbing post. "Well?" Elias muttered nervously, gripping a thick ridge of scales as the queen shifted beneath him. "This is new." The Dragon Queen stretched her wings to their full span. The shadow swallowed the valley. Then, with a single powerful motion, she leapt from the mountainside. The world dropped away. Air roared past Elias as the Dragon Queen soared into the sky. The ruined valley shrank below them, replaced by endless clouds and distant mountain peaks. Elias gasped. He had never flown before. From this height the world looked impossibly vast, forests stretching to the horizon, rivers glimmering like silver threads, villages scattered like tiny dots across the plains. The baby dragon chirped excitedly beside him, clearly enjoying the ride. "Your child seems happy," Elias said. The Dragon Queen's voice rumbled through the wind. "He does not yet understand the cruelty of the world." They flew for hours. The sun slowly began to sink behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and crimson. Finally, Elias spotted it. "There," he shouted, pointing toward a dark ridge of rock. At first it looked like an ordinary cliff, but as they drew closer, iron towers and smokestacks emerged from the stone. Massive gates guarded the entrance to a mine carved deep into the mountain. Searchlights swept across the surrounding forest. Soldiers moved along the walls. The fortress. The Dragon Queen's wings beat slower as she circled high above the clouds, observing. "Many humans," she growled quietly. Elias nodded. They built the egg chamber deep underground so no one could hear them hatch. The hatchling beside him suddenly growled, a tiny, squeaky version of its mother's rage. The queen's eyes glowed brighter. "They will hear them tonight." Below them, a soldier on the fortress wall suddenly pointed upward. "What's that in the clouds?" Another guard squinted. The shape circling above the sunset was enormous. Then the clouds parted, and the Dragon Queen descended. Sirens screamed across the fortress. Soldiers scrambled for weapons. Cannons turned toward the sky, but it was already too late, because the Dragon Queen had not come alone. And this time, She knew exactly where her stolen children were hidden. Dragon. Sirens wailed across the fortress as soldiers rushed along the iron walls, shouting orders that were nearly drowned out by the thunder of wings overhead. The Dragon Queen descended through the clouds like a storm given life, her enormous shadow swallowing the fading sunlight. Cannons swung upward, and searchlights locked onto her crimson scales. Elias clung tightly to the ridges along her neck as the wind roared past his ears. Below them the fortress looked like a nest of frightened ants scrambling across metal towers and stone battlements. "Hold on," the Dragon Queen warned. A moment later the first cannon fired. The explosion echoed across the mountains as a metal shell tore through the air toward them. The queen twisted sharply, her massive wings folding slightly as she banked sideways with impossible speed for a creature of her size. The shell streaked past and exploded harmlessly in the clouds. Elias gasped. "They have more." "I know," the queen replied calmly. Another cannon roared. Then another. Black smoke burst around them as the fortress unleashed everything it had. But the Dragon Queen had ruled the skies for centuries. Human weapons were clumsy compared to the instincts of a creature born to fly. She dove sharply, spiraling through the explosions before leveling out above the fortress gates. "Where are the eggs?" she demanded. Elias squinted through the smoke. "The mine entrance. The tunnels go straight down from there." The Dragon Queen's eyes burned with fury. She folded her wings and dropped. The fortress grew larger and larger beneath them until Elias could see the terrified faces of soldiers along the walls. Some tried to fire crossbows. Others simply ran. The Dragon Queen opened her jaws. Fire erupted. A blazing torrent of golden flame crashed across the iron gate, melting the massive doors like wax. Heat rippled across the courtyard as soldiers scattered in panic. The queen landed with a thunderous impact that shook the entire fortress. Stone cracked beneath her claws. The baby dragon on her neck squeaked proudly, as if it had personally helped with the attack. Elias quickly slid down her scales and dropped onto the ground beside her. "Inside!" he shouted, pointing toward the smoking entrance of the mine. The Dragon Queen lowered her head to peer into the dark tunnel. "I smell them," she growled softly. Deep within the fortress, frightened soldiers scrambled to defend the underground chambers. "Protect the egg vault. Do not let the dragon reach them." But panic had already spread through the base. Many of the guards had never seen a real dragon before. Facing the Dragon Queen herself was enough to break their courage. The queen stepped into the tunnel. The ground trembled with each step. Elias ran beside her, holding a torch he grabbed from the wall. The tunnel twisted deeper into the mountain until they reached a heavy iron door reinforced with chains and locks. Behind it came the faintest sound. Tap, tap, tap. Elias' eyes widened. "They're hatching." The Dragon Queen didn't hesitate. With a single strike of her claw, she ripped the iron door from its hinges. The metal shrieked as it tore free, crashing across the stone floor. Inside the chamber stood rows of cages and machinery, and at the center of it all, 5 glowing dragon eggs. Cracks were spreading across their shells. A group of terrified scientists and guards backed away from the entrance as the Dragon Queen filled the doorway like a living wall of fire and scales. One of them dropped his weapon. It's the Queen." The Dragon Queen's eyes blazed brighter than the torches. "You stole my children." No one answered. They simply ran. The Queen ignored them. Slowly, carefully, she stepped into the chamber and lowered her massive head beside the eggs. Elias watched as tears of molten gold shimmered in the corners of her eyes. One of the eggs cracked open. A tiny dragon hatchling pushed its head through the shell and squeaked softly. The Queen let out a deep, trembling rumble. "My children!" Within minutes, the chamber filled with the sounds of breaking shells and newborn chirps. 5 hatchlings tumbled onto the stone floor, blinking at the world for the first time. The baby dragon who had ridden with Elias chirped excitedly and hopped down to greet its siblings. Elias laughed in relief. "We did it." The Dragon Queen lifted her enormous head and looked at him. "You did," she said quietly. But far above them, in the fortress towers, a different group of soldiers was preparing something far more dangerous. A massive iron weapon was being rolled into position. Not a cannon, a dragon killer, and it was aimed directly at the mine entrance. Dragon. The ground shook as the massive weapon rolled into position above the fortress tunnel. Elias watched in horror as a huge iron cannon, bristling with spikes and arcane symbols, aimed directly at the hatchlings and their mother. The Dragon Queen's nostrils flared, sending a gust of heated air that rattled the walls and threw debris into the air. Her eyes blazed like molten gold as she assessed the threat. "They intend to destroy them," she rumbled, her voice echoing off the tunnel walls. Her wings unfurled fully, brushing the ceiling of the chamber and sending dust and loose stones tumbling. "Keepers of the eggs will not be harmed again." Elias swallowed hard, gripping the stone wall. I don't know what to do," he shouted over the roar of her wings. The queen's gaze softened briefly toward him. "Trust me," she said. "Stand close. Do not let fear guide you." The hatchlings chirped and squeaked, huddling together. Their tiny wings flapped furiously, and the youngest, the one golden hatchling who had bonded with Elias, climbed onto his shoulder, nuzzling his cheek for reassurance. Somehow he understood that he had to act too. A deafening blast roared from above. The dragon-killing cannon fired a massive projectile, whistling down the tunnel toward them. Elias' stomach dropped. The projectile hit the floor just before them, exploding in a shower of stone and metal shards. Dust filled the chamber, and a wall of smoke rose toward the ceiling. The hatchlings yelped in alarm. The Dragon Queen didn't flinch. She reared back, wings spread wide, and with a deep exhale released a torrent of golden fire that surged toward the weapon. The heat bent metal and shattered gears. Sparks flew, and the cannon twisted and cracked under the blast. The soldiers operating it screamed, scattering from the smoke and heat. Elias's heart pounded as he watched the queen's massive claws strike the walls with precision, toppling guard posts and clearing a path for her hatchlings. The air vibrated with her roars and the tiny chirps of her children. Each hatchling followed instinctively, using their small claws and fledgling wings to climb over debris. "Go!" the queen bellowed, glancing at Elias. "Lead them out." With trembling hands, he guided the tiny dragons through the debris-littered tunnel. Each step was tense. Rocks shifted underfoot, smoke choked the air. But the queen's massive form behind them provided both protection and inspiration. One hatchling tripped on a jagged stone, letting out a frightened squeak. Elias scooped it up, pressing it gently to his chest. The golden hatchling chirped as if encouraging the others, and one by one, all 5 hatched eggs were moving toward the tunnel exit. Above them, the fortress commanders scrambled, realizing their weapons were ineffective. "Stop her! Stop the dragon!" one shouted, but chaos had already taken over. The queen's roar reverberated through the mountains, and soldiers froze in awe and fear. Finally, the group reached the mouth of the tunnel. Sunlight spilled in, warm and bright, washing over the hatchling scales. The baby dragons chirped joyfully, taking tentative hops into the open air. One of them flapped its tiny wings and hovered briefly before landing on Elias' shoulder. The Dragon Queen emerged behind them, her wings casting a shadow over the fortress. She lifted her head high, roaring to the sky, a sound that shook stone and earth alike. Then, carefully, she nudged each hatchling forward, ensuring they were safe in the open valley. Elias stepped back, awestruck, and finally allowed himself to breathe. The hatchlings chirped and tumbled around him, exploring their first taste of freedom. The golden hatchling nuzzled his cheek again, as if saying thank you. The queen's gaze fell on him once more. "You have courage beyond your years, human. Today you returned what was stolen. Today you became part of our family." Elias smiled, exhausted but relieved. I didn't do it alone," he said. "You guided me." Her eyes softened, the fury of battle giving way to quiet pride. "And now we rebuild what was taken." High above, the sun dipped below the mountains, casting the valley in a glow of gold and crimson. The Dragon Queen, her hatchlings, and the lone human boy stood together, ready to face the world that had dared to steal from them. And somewhere deep in the fortress, those who had hunted dragons understood that nothing could stop a mother protecting her young, especially when a human had chosen to stand with her. Dragon. The valley was silent once more, but it was a silence unlike any Elias had known. The ground still trembled slightly from the Dragon Queen's descent, and the smell of scorched stone hung in the air, but the feeling was no longer one of fear. It was something heavier, yet warmer. Victory had come not from weapons or armies, but from trust, courage, and the bond between human and dragon. The hatchlings circled the boy, chirping and squeaking as they tumbled over one another, wings flapping awkwardly, claws scraping the rocks. The golden hatchling, the first to bond with Elias, climbed onto his shoulder, nuzzling his cheek in a display of affection. Elias laughed, a sound that echoed across the valley and drew the Dragon Queen's gaze. She stepped forward, each massive claw careful not to crush the delicate hatchlings. Her crimson scales glinted in the setting sun, her wings folding elegantly behind her. For the first time in weeks, she lowered her head to the earth, resting her great muzzle beside Elias. "You have done well, human," she said, her voice low but carrying across the valley like distant thunder. "You faced fear and danger without hesitation. You saved what was mine." Elias swallowed. I just wanted to help. I didn't know what else to do." The Dragon Queen's eyes softened. "That is what makes a keeper." At that moment, the hatchlings began chirping more urgently, their tiny wings flapping in excitement. They had sensed something in the distance, something alive, moving toward them. Elias turned his head just in time to see shadows crossing the valley floor. Soldiers, still alive from the fortress, had regrouped and were approaching with weapons raised, determined to reclaim what they had stolen. The Queen's roar erupted like rolling thunder, shaking the mountains. The sound alone caused several soldiers to stumble, their courage faltering. Flames flickered along her jaws, but she did not strike yet. Instead, she lifted the hatchlings carefully onto the rocks behind her, positioning them so they could see their mother's power. Elias's heart pounded, but he realized something astonishing. The soldiers were no longer the hunters. They were terrified prey. The dragons, though small and young, had already learned courage and instinct. The golden hatchling chirped and flapped its wings toward the approaching humans, and each of the others followed, creating a display of raw, untamed power that made the soldiers freeze in fear. The Dragon Queen stepped forward, her shadow falling over the human intruders. "You took my children," she said, her voice calm but deadly. "You will leave this place alive, only because I choose it." The soldiers dropped their weapons, shaking and wide-eyed. They had faced fire, yet nothing had prepared them for this. The eyes of a mother who had grieved for weeks, now reunited with her young. Elias watched, amazed, as the hatchlings chirped and squeaked, forming a protective circle around the boy who had brought them home. One of the soldiers tried to step forward, but a low growl from the Dragon Queen froze him in place. The golden hatchling let out a tiny screech, and the multicolored hatchling, the eldest of the newborns, breathed a gentle plume of flame across the rocks, not to harm, but to demonstrate power. Elias realized then that he had not only returned the Dragon Queen's young, but had earned their trust. Together, human and dragon stood as a single force, a new kind of family united by respect, courage, and the shared understanding of what it meant to protect those you love. The soldiers finally backed away, stumbling toward the treeline, knowing better than to challenge a mother and her children. The Dragon Queen lowered her head once more, this time toward Elias. "You have shown bravery beyond your years, Keeper," she said. "You have restored what was lost, and in doing so, you have changed the fate of dragons and humans alike." Elias felt the hatchlings chirp around him, brushing against his legs and shoulders, tiny claws and wings testing his courage and strength. And he understood something profound. This was only the beginning. The Dragon Queen's grief had ended, but the bond they had forged was eternal. Together, they would reclaim what had been stolen, heal what had been broken, and rise above a world that had underestimated the strength of dragons, and the humans who chose to stand with them. High above, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the valley in gold and crimson. 8 tiny dragons chirped, the dragon queen's wings stretched wide in triumph, and a lone human boy stood amidst them, no longer small, no longer fearful. Now a keeper, part of something far greater than himself. Dragon,